Yeah, now officially welcome to my short talk on the politics of code. As discussed with Pierre and Craig, this class was conceived by Pierre under the time when Craig was program head here in NYU Abu Dhabi. And then when I came 2 years ago, I took over Pierre's class and made it my own. And it is one of my most favorite. So my name is Jörg Blumtritt, and I teach interactive media at New York University in Abu Dhabi. So the question of politics in a country like that is, of course, always dancing on eggshells. But let's just see. What does it mean, politics of code? I mean, I guess that, although we have never talked about that the idea of the name of the class and how it was brought to be has to do with this long-running, very successful class by Dan Schiffman at ITP, the nature of code. So you have the nature of code, you have politics of code, and I would always imagine you have also something like the society of code and maybe the economics of code. I would really love the economics of code as being an entrepreneur. So it has to do with, if you think of the nature of code, that nature can be brought into code and can be make things animated. And in the same way, we could think of politics being brought into code, and we shall talk a bit about that, but it has more to it. And what does the word politics mean? I mean, it's a Greek word, so it comes from the West, as so many things that we teach. Politics is, for example, the name of a book by Aristotle. And Aristotle in this book describes what the ancient Greeks, like 2,300 years ago, would understand of politics. So for the Greek, the basic human condition was living in a struggle for survival in your household. So it was people's main obligation to stay alive, to feed their family, to feed their children. And this is what they did in the kitchen. So the condition of people is what the Greek called the rule or the law of the kitchen. Oikonomos. So nomos means the law and oikos means the stove. So, and there is no space for art or culture and no space at all for ethics in oikonomy. So economics is about profit. It is about economic survival. And as Aristotle lays out, opposite of that, we need a second sphere of human life, which has to do with the polis, which is the community. It is the city. It is where the free people of the city negotiate what is regarded right and wrong. So we have these two parts of human life, economy and politics, that stay, so to say, in contradiction to each other. And also for the Greek, they had a name for people who could not be in the political sphere. So people who were so poor that they could only struggle for their survival at home, so to say. These really poor people who could not go and politicize on the forum. Those people were called idiotes, the idiots. And so an idiot in Greek, in philosophy, is not a person who is stupid. It is a person who can't take action. And then the 20th century philosopher Hannah Arendt, who taught at the New School in New York, she took Aristotle's ideas and said, well, taking action is what makes us human. So acting politically is what is human. And we will look into that, how that has to do with what we do with digital technologies. So this is politics. Yeah, and a contrarian view on that can be found if we go to Silicon Valley. I mean, here, Brian Behlendorf, you might know him. He's the founder of the Apache Foundation. I mean, one of the original programmers of the Apache server. One of the most influential people, I would say, in the open software movement. He's also one of the co-founders of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and thus has always been fighting for freedom in the digital realm. So Brian Behlendorf gives this interesting quote. So there is corruption and bureaucracy and inefficiency. I mean, this is what Californians, I guess, think of governments. And there are technological problems. Couldn't this just be fixed? So here we have another view on politics. So politics is just an engineering problem. And this is, I would say, in a lot of attitude that we find in the in digital entrepreneurs and in corporations, that politics should not go in the way that technology will fix it. So these are, so to say, opposing ideas. This belief that technology will fix it is not only in this libertarian side, it's not only a right-wing thing. It is also deeply rooted in very left-leaning and socialist ideas, in the idea of the economy that is data-driven, the politics that is data-driven. And if you look at this beautiful picture, this is one of the few remaining pictures of the project CyberSyn. So CyberSyn was a concept project by the just newly elected president of Chile, Allende. So Allende was a socialist. Today we would probably call him a social democrat, and he believed that the decolonization should be fully fulfilled, and that people should have their own governance. But he was very realistic and saw that his working class colleagues in the movement, they had not higher education, so they were not an elite. And to fix that, he built a system, or let build a system based on the most powerful computer at that time, that would basically be a data science system, so that the government would have all the data and all the aid possible to make good decisions. And to have that in this egalitarian way, he let that design in this super spacecraft-like modernist utopian design as you see it here. So that was in 1971. In 1973, he was overthrown by a military coup that was staged or orchestrated by the CIA, and which brought into power one of the most cruel dictators that South America ever saw, Pinochet. And Pinochet, with his junta, one of the first things that he did, personally overseeing that, is going in there with a group of his thugs armed with sledgehammers, and let smash the whole CyberSyn system to pieces and let nothing survive. That was in 1973. So here you have a technological optimism. So Allende saw that technology could help his politics of a socially just system. 50 years later, there is not much left of this optimism, I would say. We have learned that the technology, the digital technology, is not without its political problems. Be it harassment, be it bullying, or be it fake news and interfering with politics, be it the filter bubble that these systems nourish, that bring people into really esoteric, weird right-wing belief groups, and even lead to, a deep polarization and split in societies, not only in the US, that is the same in most countries in Europe, for example. It is very heavily troubling the society. In India these days, there is these lynch mobs organizing over WhatsApp, going after people who probably be homosexual or otherwise not seen as in their norms, going after people of lower castes and so on. So India is troubled in exactly the same way. So it is not only a Western problem, but it is our technology that nourishes these problems. And then we have what is called surveillance capitalism. That is a term by also East Coast scholar Shoshana Zuboff. I think she teaches at MIT. So years ago, she wrote this paper and says, what these firms actually do is they invented a new form of making money on surveillance. And this is not only in this blunt way that companies like Facebook or Google notoriously scrape all the data that they get, and it is very personal data. I mean, it tells basically the story of your life, and this is certainly something that is worthwhile looking into it. I mean, understanding how this is a breach of privacy in the sense that it is assaultive and that people have no say in it and no choice. In particular, not if these companies collude with authoritarian regimes, which they do all over the world. Surveillance capitalism has another side of it. So this is Amazon's product Ring. So Ring is a really interesting thing. So it's a surveillance system for keeping your house safe. So if you are worried about burglary, you have the Ring system. And the Ring system is not a local alarm system. The Ring has a connection and uploads its video stream and surveillance data on Amazon's cloud servers. And from there, the decision is made if an intrusion takes place and the actions are brought on the way. What, however, Amazon does is they take the data, they take the video footage, not only to protect the people in the houses, but also to give very sophisticated surveillance data to law enforcement. I mean, when that became obvious, everyone in their minds should have understood that is outrageous, and it should actually have broken the problem, and no one should buy these technologies anymore. However, people are obviously totally fine with it and don't understand why it is a problem to invite law enforcement, to invite police and the security services into your house, into your most private sphere, and even pay for it. And that, I think, is the interesting thing, this ideological form of surveillance capitalism. By the way, this photograph, that is in a big shopping mall here in Abu Dhabi, and I saw the exact same setup in London just a few weeks earlier. And so it is a worldwide rollout of these products, and clearly does not only serve American law enforcement and security services. Well, now, I mean, we have talked about the surveillance capitalism and all that is kind of bad in these obvious forms of technology. There's a lot of criticism going on. There's debate about regulation in the US. A very constructive debate, I think, is going on in the government and in the houses. The same is taking place in the European Union. Just day before yesterday, the draft of the European Union directive on privacy, on self-determination and AI has been leaked, and it's a very thorough document. It's like some 800 pages of regulation that was brought together. I mean, in the details you can clearly nitpick on it, but it will certainly change the game. So governments and societies have that on their plate now. And we read about that in the major news outlets, in the major magazines and so on all the time. And there is a lot of scholarship. Institutions like here in New York, for example, Data and Society, that was founded by Dana Boyd, who at the time was a researcher at Microsoft, or I guess still is. It's a very interesting research group, very diverse, and super great research coming out of it. And then over a couple of years here at NYU, the research group AI Now, that was founded by Kate Crawford, who is also coming from Microsoft, and Meredith Patterson, who comes from Google. It's also great work done there, interesting papers, I mean, that really make a change, and they found governments listening them. So I think, so this first section of Politics of Code is super interesting. It's worthwhile looking at it, but people deal with it already. So there is no need, I think, to keep it so detailed. There is more interesting parts now that I want to bring to your mind, and that have to do with culture. So in 1960, the American Standard Code for Information Interchange was brought to life. And computers in 1960 were incredibly small. So memory was really scarce. And so a byte was the maximum that engineers could think of using for representing one character. And I mean, that was all Americans. I mean, America at that time was the superpower, was leading all the West. And so what they did is basically cast their alphabet, the English alphabet, and the other characters that you need to run a computer into it. You have only 256 values. That's 2 to the 8 in a byte. And so it's very limited, of course. And if you think that you have 26 characters times 2 for the upper and lower case, then you have 10 numbers. Of course, you have some of the special characters like punctuation and carriage return and things like that. I mean, the 256 is clearly not much space. That would, of course, not have been a problem would America at that time not be technologically completely dominant. And there was no chance for other cultures to develop their own systems. And so everyone from that time on, not only in the West, but all over the world, had to use the English alphabet to express whatever they wanted, to write code. And so this is a very subtle form of cultural imperialism. I mean, people didn't think of that in that imperialist way. I wouldn't blame them for that. But this is factual, what happened. That I, for example, when I was young, had to change my name from using the umlauts that I usually have to using only English letters, which I still do to this date. I mean, the Western European countries, I mean, we can live with that. We at least have some similarity of our alphabets. It's much worse if you think of people writing in Cyrillic, or in Hebrew, or in Arabic. I mean, these are alphabets, or in Hindi, or Malayalam. I mean, all these other alphabetic languages that you could, in theory, easily represent in one byte. But it was just not done. So instead of keeping the system open and making it possible for people to use their alphabet on the same logic, the system was closed and was standardized only for this very small alphabet. For the logographic languages, like Chinese, Japanese, or Korean, of course, that would not be an option at all. You have thousands of characters that you need to represent. And so this is a time when people in these countries had to start using the English alphabet and give up their own alphabet if they wanted to use digital technologies. And that is the interesting thing if you think of that, that Korea or China had printing technology centuries before the West had it. So they had typewriters that were perfectly fine and working well. And it was therefore not before the 1970s when this final takeover of Western culture took place. There is never a force like that, to speak with Foucault, without resistance. So whenever something is as rigid politically and keeps you from having your freedom, people find ways to subvert it. And that came even from the same culture, so to say, from the hacker culture. People were annoyed with the alphabet and said, you know what, we just use another alphabet. And you see here, this is a hacker space in Vienna where I took this picture of their server cupboard. So you see the 1337, and you might know what that means. Yes, it's the word lead. It's this kind of type that you can do on a pocket calculator just using the boxy numbers. So if you turn that around, you see the word lead, which means elite. And this is what these hackers said of themselves. So we are so lead, you know, we write in a language that no one else understands. And here you see, just I tried that out using just random stuff on the NYU Abu Dhabi homepage and translated that into the lead speak. And I mean, it's a bit difficult to read, so it's very silly. It's not really a secret code either. Once you got it, then I mean, of course, you understand how it works. But it's fun to do. And the interesting thing is, it has a it has real cultural value for people who need to use digital technology but want to express themselves in their language. For example, here in Arabia, and in North Africa likewise, people invented their form of the lead speak, which is called Arabizi. So Arabizi uses numbers and special characters to supplement to the alphabet to be able to write the characters that would otherwise not be available. And if you look on the Arabic Twitter, if I look at what my students kind of text to each other, you see that is totally widespread. In the French speaking, it's more called Muzarab. And this intervention of coming up with a subculture, I mean, of course, it was immediately then also commodified. I mean, there's no shortage of advertising agencies who provide now service so that you can make use for your marketing in Arabizi, so that you don't lose your social media monitoring and your advertising targeting. So there is even commercial services harvesting on that already. So no tactical invention into political technology that gets not immediately reversed to a commodity. That's also has been true from the beginning. Arabic is not the only language that makes use kind of in this tactical interventionist way. So the Russians very early on invented their own form. It's called Volapuk. So Kodirovka Volapuk, the Volapuk code. And the funny thing is, Volapuk is one of these early 19th century plant languages. I think it was a Swiss scholar who wanted to invent this language that would be more egalitarian, because no one would be native in it, and so it would be not imperialistic, and everyone could use it, kind of this universal language. There's more famous ones like Esperanto that were more successful also. And Volapuk was an early one, and obviously the Russians found were very fond of the name of it. And Volapuk is also, I mean, totally common that people use that on their phones texting, and instead of switching back and forth between the Latin and the Cyrillic alphabet, they just use the Volapuk representation and by that overcome the shortage of characters in the ASCII code. Finally, I mean, I don't want to give the impression that having a standard is something necessarily bad. Actually, I totally enjoy that English is the lingua franca, that is a language in which I, for example, can be here and teach, even if it is not my native language. And of course, my students obviously enjoy that as well. I mean, they come from all over the world, as you do. And I mean, if we wouldn't have that, I mean, it would be very dire to have a global education. And I don't believe in these plant languages like Esperanto. As much as I like the idea, you know, it's very playful and so on, that just doesn't work. I mean, if we have a language that people speak, and of course that creates some inequality, but I think that is a price I'm absolutely comfortable paying. And other people think even that they might have, peoples really, that they might profit from it. For example, here, this is a recent news item about Kazakhstan. So Kazakhstan is giving up the Cyrillic alphabet and is switching to the Latin alphabet because they see it as a better chance for them to be part of the global community. And there's other countries who took that step. For example, Turkey in 1923, after the Turkish Revolution, the Turkish leader Kemal Atatürk decided to give up Arabic, which he saw as being part of religious oppression and the conservative heritage, and transliterated or let transliterate the Turkish language in the Latin alphabet. Funny enough that he used the German version of the Latin alphabet with all the umlauts, because I guess he spoke German. So this is how the Turks ended up with all the umlauts. So this is why it looks so similar to German, just a bit more extreme in that. So this universalist aspect is, I think, again, is one of these opposites So we have the problem of having to use English and dive into the Anglo-American cultural world to be part of the universal digital sphere. On the other hand, it is a great relief. It brings a lot of freedom that we have it, that we actually can use it. So with this, I would switch now to the next chapter of kind of exploitation and difficult power differentials, which is labor. So in the beginning of the internet, people had high hopes that digital technology would make it possible to spread divided labor more equally, that it would not longer be necessary to stay in one place. You could spread your work to people in poor countries also, and so on. And to some extent, that is obviously true. However, what we also see is the gig economy. So technology is not the cause, I would say, but is an enabler to what in the 18th or 19th century was called sharecropping, which is that you have people who are not employed and who have to use their own tools to make a living. But are not free. They are not like free craftspeople. Like in old times, that was true for many of the farmers if they were not under the bond, if they were not in bonded serfdom. But for example, in indented servitude and other forms of depending on the landlord, they had to keep their things running. They had to have their plows, their oxen, all the machinery to harvest. And the same is true for many of the craftspeople, like for example for the weavers. The weavers had to pay for their weaver's loom. It was their own property. And if it would break, no one would pay. There was no employer who would pay for the loss. And even worse, not only would they have to pay to repair the weaver's loom, in that time they wouldn't earn any money. And that is what fueled the revolutionary movements in the early 19th century. That's the basic of the Marxist ideas of the first half of the 19th century, these revolutionary ideas, that something is wrong with that. And now, 150 years later, we come back to that with Uber, for example. The Uber drivers don't own the company. They have no share in it. They are just seen as freelancers using their own cars. And the same is, of course, true for most of the delivery people. And there's political decisions these days going on, like in the UK, where the court ruled that Uber has to employ their drivers, that it would be actually not just under British labour law. And if you look at the share price of Deliveroo is the largest delivery service, I think, outside the US. It's based in London and just went public. So Deliveroo, their share price plummeted after this court decision. Why? Because everyone expects that the British court will decide, well, that is also true for all the delivery people. It's not just that they have to ride on their own motorbikes or electric bikes and are not properly employed. So this sharecropping is a political struggle that has to do with negotiating labor situations in the digital world that was not a thing when we had people going into a factory and we had trade unions representing them. So this precariousness of digital work is tied with technology. And it has very nasty consequences. So if you ask yourself, where does all the bad AI come from? Why is so much of artificial intelligence so crappy? Well, it has to do with how it is trained. So many of the companies who develop systems, like for example, image recognition systems, in particular face recognition systems, use, sweatshops, literally, to get the images classified. So people are paid as little as like 1 cent per image to classify an image or to identify an image. And you can imagine how that works. And first of all, you don't get people who are properly qualified to do the work. You just get random, uneducated people all over the world contributing to that. There is no check if people have racist or sexist belief. And I mean, no wonder, I mean, in many parts of the world, these things are not even discussed in a critical way. So we find a lot of this racism and prejudice, sexism and other forms of really bad attribution in how images are classified. And I mean, there is no easy way out of that other than just, admitting that it is a problem. And I think this discussion has not been targeted well enough. To some extent, there is great art going on. Another ITP alum, Lauren McCarthy. I mean, her work deals with that. So Lauren has this idea of an AI that is actually humans. Like, for example, in the project where people would have an Alexa-like smart home device, but the smart home was actually Lauren being in a control center, so to say, with her laptop and doing all the tasks that people would require from their AI. Another nice project that was very similar in a gallery setup where the people in the gallery would, for example, decide the lighting in people's homes and would act as this kind of swarm AI. So I think there is a lot of room to play with this and to work with it in a tactical way and show how these systems actually work. How does image recognition actually recognize people and make that visible? Yeah, so that's the labor part of it. I think that is a super interesting part. I mean, playing with AI on the one hand, playing with the social implications on the other is fun and has an impact. So very similar form kind of struggle and with labor we face with intellectual property and authorship. So since I was a child, the publishing industry always tried to prevent people from making copies. However, I don't know if you even recognize what that is. I mean, that is a magnetic tape cassette. So this is where people recorded music, and you could record music from your vinyl records, for example, or from the radio, and share that with others. But as long as you would just share that among each other, just give someone the tape and so on, there was really no crackdown by the industry. It was just too small. With the internet, of course, that radically changed, and people immediately abused the existing copyright law to extract money from the innocence of people using the new technology. So this is an image that I found on Google. It comes from a very notorious company. It's actually a law firm who publishes a cookbook website called Marion's Kochbuch. And if you look at it, there's not really recipes on it. The site as such has been shut down by the courts in the meantime. So Marion's Kochbuch was a site that was search engine optimized, so that when people would look for like an image of a sandwich or an image of a glass of tea or anything, it was very likely that the image from Marion's Kochbuch would be one of the first hits. These very generic images then would be taken by people, for example, and put on their blogs. So people would have, I made sandwiches today, and just have that on their blog. It is the time before Twitter and Instagram would kind of shield you from this kind of trouble, because then the lawyers would crack down on people and send them subpoenas and sue them for thousands of euros in settlements. Thousands of people had to pay millions were made by this company until they pushed it too far and were shut down and brought to justice for fraud. It is, however, not an uncommon cause. You think of fair use, which is a term in American legal practice. It is not in Europe. So here you see another ITP alum, Eddie Wagenknecht, who is interviewing our friend Peter Sunde at this conference. So Peter Peter is an artist. He's from Finland and lived in Sweden at that time when he was really troubled by this by this intellectual property fight, by keeping things from sharing, from circulating. And so he built a website together with a couple of other people called the Pirate Bay, on which people could just share things. But it was an art project. It was not a commercial project at all. And the publishing industry, namely, I think it was Sony Music, completely cracked down on him and brought him to justice and really hunted him down until he was completely done. And he had to serve a prison term even. And other people like Aaron Swartz, another activist here in the US, I mean, he was literally driven to death by the district attorney here in New York, or was it in Boston? I forgot. Who hunted him so badly, and he faced 26 years of prison for his, I mean, ridiculous kind of small activist approach in downloading the JSTOR database. So when Peter went to prison, activists and friends around him started the Pirate Party in his defense. And in the first years, the Pirate Party focused on this aspect, the unjust aspect of intellectual property. And very soon, the Pirate Party kind of evolved from that and became more interesting to me also. I was very engaged in it, as we shall see, experimenting with new forms of democracy that would make use of the internet. So the Pirate Party was the idea that, yes, the technology brings a lot of trouble. There is forces at work that do evil with the technology, but we want the technology. We don't want to be against it. We want to use it for the better of society. And for that, we have to do a political fight. When Peter came out of prison, he kept working in these artistic interventions. So this is a very nice small thing that he built then. So one of the things that Sony Music sued him for was that, I mean, these many copies of songs that he had on the Pirate Bay, and they said, well, that is millions and millions of losses. Each song is like a $3 download, and so it's millions and millions because it's thousands of songs. And then he built this, this is kind of like a wristwatch. It's a bracelet that continuously copies a song, one of the songs for which he was convicted. So like in a day, it would like make a million or so copies of that song and would always show how much loss that is. And then like within a few weeks, the losses, these kind of virtual losses, would of course be kind of surmounting the amount of money that is in the world. Because it's not real. That's the point of this intervention. It's made up. It is only a convention. It is politics. It is not real. It is not really that by copying a digital file, you steal it, because the original file is still there. However, there is of course trouble in not being able to, so to say, commoditize your art. And you certainly became aware of the recent craze on the, I would say, second big blockchain wave with the non-fungible tokens, the NFTs. There's Lindsay Howard with their, I mean, I think well-deserved success in commodifying Nyan Cat, the bit annoying meme of some 5 years ago. And I mean, I was very critical at first. I said, oh God, it's all this techie art. I mean, if you look on the exchanges for for NFTs. It looks, much of it is really, I mean, so techy. And I mean, what is it? I mean, it's basically just a certification that you actually paid the money to the artist. And then I discussed with Eddie Wagenknecht, that you've just seen on the other picture, and she had a class visit just 2 weeks ago in my class here in Politics of Code. And she says, no, this is not true at all. For me, that is really exactly it. So, I mean, otherwise, I mean, even if I want to make digital art, I can actually only sell my paintings. So only my paintings, these robotic paintings that she makes, they sell, but the digital art, I mean, no one wants to buy. And with the NFTs, it's different. Suddenly there's a market for that. And that's good because it actually makes artists money. And so she was very enthusiastic about that, although she's very critical of the blockchain technology as a whole. I mean, she has been working for leading blockchain, I would say, one of the leading blockchains for quite a while. So she has seen that from the inside. So this commodification of art makes me uncomfortable because, I mean, art is not all about that. If you think of art in public space or all the residencies, the grants by which artists make also a living. On the other hand, I agree. I mean, it's not that collectors who would usually buy paintings suddenly buy fewer paintings because they now invest everything in NFTs. It's really a new market that breaks up. Let's see how it stays, or if it stays. Well, the blockchain, I mean, a talk like that shouldn't end without mentioning the blockchain. I really love this flowchart by Wind Cerf. Yeah, I mean, Cerf, as you might know, is, I think, rightfully credited with one of the major inventions that brought us the internet. So he's one of the fathers of the internet. He is behind TCP/IP, the basic protocol, the packet switching protocol on which the internet runs. So, but if you think of, I mean, and now I tend to disagree with Wind here. So, because what is the internet? Why is the internet so special? Packet switching on a corporate network level had been around for a while. So what was really the new thing that the internet brought? Well, it is that the internet is totally open. It is open to everyone. It's easy to access. Basically, everyone can just set up their server. And even if you just go through one of the ISPs or so, I mean, it's very easy to publish your things, like have a website, a WordPress website, or use one of the services like Medium or whatever. So the internet is super open, and it's not only open to people in the West or rich people. I mean, 5 billion people in the world, it's basically every adult in the world, has a smartphone. So that means at least to some basic level access to the internet. So that is something new, that the internet is very open. It is very resistant to censorship. Not totally. You can have firewalls like China or so that censor, but still it is the most censorship-proof technology that we have seen so far. So there is something beautiful in this openness and egalitarian structure that the internet in principle has. And the blockchain you can think of as a protocol that runs on top of the internet. I mean, just like HTTP, the protocol that we use for the web, the hypertext protocol, or like email, I mean, which we use every day. That is also a protocol that runs on top of TCP/IP. The blockchain is another protocol. It's a very complex protocol. That is the protocol that makes it possible to have assets represented. And the problem with blockchain technology is that the culture around it is so horrible. I mean, everything is about kind of this bloking about your quick money. So it is, if you have a problem with the culture of financial services people, I mean, like go downtown Wall Street or whatever. Blockchain is that like on steroids. And no wonder that people are concerned with it. I took that a couple of years ago in Hong Kong, I mean, during the first blockchain bubble, in the metro, you know, I mean, for commuters, I mean, there was already, blockchain was already so much that people would gamble their money on all these coins that the government put out the warning. And I mean, that might be true. So this is near the place in Brooklyn, in Flatbush, where we lived. I mean, clearly not a very privileged neighborhood. That was in the laundromat where I always washed the laundry. Very basic laundry, but it had a Bitcoin ATM. I mean, you can't believe that with these signs, handwritten signs. So there's a lot, I mean, to think about blockchain being difficult. However, I made my money with it, and not by speculation, but by working for a project that was one of the most interesting experiences in my life so far. So in 2016, the United Nations World Food Programme approached us. So the World Food Programme is the United Nations agency for distributing aid. So they basically ship aid to refugees. That's about 20 million people on a daily basis that live on the World Food Programme's support. And nowadays, I mean, it's not so much giving aid in kind, because I mean, the refugees might just be in places where there is a functioning market and there's no shortage of goods, but they need money to pay for it. They don't need the food brought to them in packages and sacks. And so what we developed for the World Food Programme was a payment and accounting system that would run on the Ethereum blockchain to make it easy to distribute money in a secure way, to preserve people's privacy because they were very vulnerable, and at the same time be fully accountable that the people in need would actually receive the money without any deduction of value. And that went live in May 2017 in a refugee camp in Jordan, about an hour outside Amman, mostly Syrian refugees. And since that time, it has been running flawlessly, supporting millions of people now on a daily basis, distributing the money at less than 5% of the cost of the previous system. That was a debit card system that they had deployed before it. So that was an amazing success and totally convinced me that we can achieve really important political goals with the blockchain by making payment disintermediated and not having to pay these huge cuts. Like here, for example, and in most places in the world, money transfers are like $5 or up. And $5, if you just buy an onion, is of course a huge amount of money. So to give you some outlook, I have two things that I want to give you on the way. I mean, my last was already quite optimistic. So maybe, I mean, there is a clear danger that we face in the next years, which is called the balkanization of the technological world. And that's exactly what's happening in these blackouts, in building more firewalls between countries. And it's not only China. I mean, here in the UAE, in the United Arab Emirates, most of the internet is censored and blocked out. It's very difficult to access content outside this university. In Kashmir in India, for example, there was an internet blackout by the government. Over months, people were totally cut off communication. So this is something that is very serious and needs to be addressed, I think, politically. But there is also something that is kind of the opposite side, and we have a new technology, and I would really love to see some art and some creative project addressing that is privacy-preserving computation. And just to mention that, that is things like, for example, Google's new advertising product, which uses federated learning. Federated learning doesn't take the data; it only take abstracted information on an aggregated level. It's very hard to break the privacy of people. And there's other systems like homomorphic encryption. Homomorphic encryption, you can operate on the encrypted data without revealing its true nature and get all the results. Same with zero knowledge proofs, where you can authenticate people, you can authenticate and identify also transactions without revealing any details of what you authenticate, just in a mathematical way. And the second thing I think is also a very strong chance, it's new cooperativism. So these new cooperative forms of participation is what I enjoyed so much working on. In the Pirate Party, it is taking what was good in cooperatives, like shared ownerships, and scale that, because cooperatives only scale to some extent. There's huge cooperatives here in the US, there's huge cooperatives in India, 300,000 cooperatives in Europe, basically in agriculture. So it is a tested model of working together, very different from having a corporation where you own shares but don't really have a say in the company. And here in New York, there is an institute to study platform cooperativism led by Trevor Scholz at the New School. And if you look at the website platform.coop, you see super interesting and very encouraging examples of how digital platforms can bring people, enable people to work together and own their profits and their companies jointly, globally. Yeah, and that was it now, with my very short cursory walk through the politics of code. Yeah, I hope I could tell you some new things, and I'm very much looking forward now to your questions.